Joining us now, Cougar Insider Mitch Harper, kind enough to hang out with us. Mitch, how you doing?
Doing great, guys. Happy to be on.
All right, so what are your big storylines you're looking for going into spring ball with BYU?
Well, definitely what you guys were talking about with the defensive side and Kelly Papinga taking over as, DC now. And, he's been prepared for this moment, 2 decades almost of coaching experience. And this was Kalani Sitake's first choice. And when Kalani says that, typically you say it's a little bit of coach speak because maybe that's the guy you end up hiring, so you're going to make it seem like that. But that was really the buzz that Kalani wanted to go with Kelly Papinga. Gerald Guilford was in that mix too. But Kelly Papinga was the guy that he wanted to turn to. And it makes a lot of sense too because, when you ever look at like a short list of, BYU head coach candidates, even though Kalani, of course, is locked in long term, Kelly Papinga was one of those names that you kind of look at. Maybe he's got that ceiling. So there's always been a high view of Kelly Papinga. I'm just curious to see in spring ball what some of the wrinkles he brings to this defense that has been very successful the past 2 years. And he's around a coaching staff that has a lot of defensive coordinator experience around him. So there's a bit of a collaborative effort that you're going to see. And I think that's going to be the messaging from Kalani this offseason with this defense. But K-Pop will lead the way and call it. And I'm curious to see what wrinkles he throws into this defense. That should be a pretty talented group with a lot of returning experience heading into spring ball.
Hey, Mitch, great to talk to you, by the way. I've read your stuff, and I've listened to some of your podcasts and whatnot at KSLSports.com. You do a tremendous job. Obviously, quarterback's always the focus, and I think everybody could agree that you didn't expect as you didn't expect Bear Bachmeier to be as good as he was. How good can be in year two? I mean, what progress do you want to see out of him going from his freshman season to his sophomore season?
You have to see him be, the best quarterback in the Big 12. Outside of last year where Texas Tech had, the nation's best defense, and we saw that again really on display at the Combine with David Bailey putting up crazy numbers in the 40. Typically what we've seen in recent years, the best quarterback in the Big 12 typically is with the Big 12 champion, and that's what Bear Bachmeier needs to be for BYU. And I think it was a huge step in the right direction for Bear. One, being able to play every single game because he is a guy that is physical and will take on contact and take on defenders with that size. And, seeing him in the winter and, shooting baskets at that Utah Jazz celebrity game with the youth at the Delta Center, he looks like he's gotten a little bit bigger. Curious to see, his size up close and in person today. But, he's got to, I think that the potential is there for him to be the best quarterback in the Big 12. And I think the quarterback play in this league has taken a hit. I think that was one of the knocks on the conference this year was that you saw, guys like Rocco Beck leave and follow Matt Campbell to Penn State, and, Sorsby stayed in the league by going to Texas Tech. But there were some big losses at the signal callers. And I think there's an opportunity for Bear to emerge as that top guy. And I think that's the challenge in front of him. And I know that he's a guy that gets mixed reviews from Cougar fans. Aaron Roderick, you kind of got to give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, what he's done the last handful of years with all these quarterbacks, it's been pretty impressive. And, I would assume that, the Bears going to take a step forward. I thought, the last time that he had a quarterback that was going to be a returning starter was Jaron Hall, and Jaron got better in his senior season statistically. He just didn't have the great defense to pair up with him. And that's where that season in 2022 really dipped compared to expectations. But, you would assume that Aaron Rodgers can get a lot out of his QB, and if Bear can stay healthy, I think he could be in that conversation, be the best quarterback in the Big 12. That's the potential for him.
When you look at and we don't need to go into the situation specifically, but with some absences on the court, or with a glaring absence now on the wide receiver side, how do you look at that room going forward?
Yeah, in the Parker Kingston situation, it's difficult. I mean, you just see him earlier this week, and he's in a discovery hearing, and he's in a suit, and he's got it's a tough deal, and it'll be interesting to hear Kalani talk about that, because that's going to have to be something that's a big talking point. I mean, the absence of Parker Kingston's huge because he was the number one receiver for BYU last year. Now, part of that, I think, was due to the amount of attention that Chase Roberts commanded. And, now this year, it's wide open for this, wide receiver unit. JoJo Phillips would be maybe the assumed guy that you would look at and say he's wide receiver one and going to be that top target. He dealt with a shoulder injury that he suffered in week 2 against Stanford and really was never the same receiver. He came back for that game in Lubbock against Texas Tech, and he had that drop, and he had a few drops late in the season. So as a byproduct of that, I don't think that gives him an upper hand on or upper leg on anyone in terms of being wide receiver one. This needs to be open competition. I think it's a very intriguing battle. I think the good news for BYU is that they do have more options at the tight end unit. They do lose Carson Ryan, but Walker Lyons should be that tight end one to step in and replace Ryan. I think he could be even better at that position. And then, Noah Moeaki comes back. He had a touchdown grab last season. He'll be in the mix. And then Roger Saliapaga, Oregon transfer, hasn't really done anything yet at the collegiate level, was a heralded recruit like many are that go to Oregon. They like the skill set, the size, the measurables, but it's more of a projection base with him. But I think the options there at tight end are much better than where it's been since BYU joined the Big 12. And that could be an area that can maybe mask some of the, maybe lack of depth at wide receiver because, that wide receiver spot's got intriguing personnel with JoJo Phillips, Cody Hagan, Reggie Frischneck's a name to watch. He was someone that was gaining buzz in fall camp last year until he got a little bit banged up. A former Snow College transfer, Weber State guy, good size. He could be intriguing. And then also Kyler Casper, a 6'6" transfer from Oregon as well. He's dealt with multiple foot injuries in his college career, heading into his 5th year in college football, still 2 years of eligibility remaining because he's had a couple medical red shirts. He's someone that Aaron Roderick believes could be a real factor for BYU at the receiver unit. But again, there's been no production his entire college career. It's more kind of projecting that he's going to be someone that fits in BYU's offense. So that wide receiver unit, they've got to establish, a 2 deep that they really feel confident in, or else they probably have to go dip into the portal and get someone that's still kind of remaining in there. And that's not ideal because there's no spring portal anymore. So you're not going to get a fresh batch of names to go into that thing. It's the guys that are kind of left hanging around right now. And I don't think you want to swim in those waters at this moment.
Mitch, outside of the receiver's position, as you just astutely broke down, what other intriguing position battles should BYU fans kind of be aware of as you go into spring practices?
I think the offensive line is going to be really interesting because they bring in, an influx of transfers that I think they feel could start right away. But they also like a lot of the returning personnel. Bruce Mitchell, he's an all Big 12 first-team guy from a season ago. He'll be the starter at center. They bring back Andrew Gentry. I think where the intrigue lies with him, former Michigan transfer. He started at right tackle last season. Do they swing him over to the left side? He has played the left tackle position at his time at Michigan. They bring a player in Paki Finau from the University of Washington. He was a heralded recruit, 4-star guy that BYU was recruiting heavily when the former offensive line coach Darryl Funk was there. They couldn't get him out of high school. He goes to Washington, and now he comes to BYU. He could play tackle. He could play guard. I think he's probably the best transfer of the group. Junior Sia comes in from Utah State, and then Zach Yamauchi from Stanford, and they still got some returning personnel with, Kyle Safarichok and Sonny Makassini. There's some good options there on that offensive line. Like this could be, I think this is going to be maybe the best one that Kalani's had since they arrived in the Big 12. They've had some good offensive lines, but I think this one will be the best one yet because of the options. They got to stay healthy, and that's going to be key and paramount. But I think that offensive line, just figuring out who that 5 is going to be, should be some pretty good competition because they also have some guys that have been, just biding their time, redshirt freshmen, redshirt sophomores that they've been really high on that haven't had opportunities to play that'll factor into the mix too, like a Joe Brown, former Lone Peak prospect. So there's some interesting battles there along the offensive line in spring coming up.
You talk about that offensive line, and I admit I'm biased. I know him, and I've worked with him, but I was heaping the praise on TJ Woods as soon as BYU hired because they needed a little toughness in that room. They needed a guy that would really bring that level of energy and fire, and TJ's done that. Just how impressed are you that he is, we talk about a lot of coaches getting poached, but the fact that he's back at BYU is a big win.
It definitely is. And I think, to Kevin's point earlier, to open this segment, with Kalani at the top of it all, even when there are some moving pieces on the coaching staff, I think there's still this feeling that BYU is going to now have, the floor has been leveled up for BYU, where they're a program now that you don't think they're going to have an epic fall to 5 wins or 4 wins. They seem like, the floor is probably 8. And then if you get a few bounces go your way, as they've kind of had the past couple of years into some of these games, maybe you can be in that 11-win territory, 10-win threshold. And that's where you're now in the playoff conversation is BYU's experience. Now can they break through? And at the center of it all has got to be at the offensive line. And they feel really good about where they're at on that offensive line. And you look at kind of the recruiting that they've been putting together for even the 2027 and 28 cycles. I mean, they're in the mix for some, heralded recruits that are top 100 guys in the next couple cycles that they feel pretty optimistic about. So BYU's in a good place there. And I think that what's turned the corner was, they've actually been producing NFL guys. They went that long stretch from 2005 to 2020 without an NFL draft pick, which is crazy to think because, BYU just, in the heyday with Lavelle, it was always, churning out, big, mature offensive linemen that are going to the league. And they went 15 years without a draft pick. And I remember like the first day that Kalani addressed the media in a practice, like it was 10 years ago this month. He said that he's going to build up humongous offensive lines again at BYU. Well, fast forward to now in the Big 12, he's done that. And now it's kind of a matter of, maybe taking it to a higher level. And I kind of look at this whole season, even though there's going to be high expectations for Kalani and this team, it almost feels a little bit like a year one again for Kalani, where, 2016 to 2020 was phase one of Kalani's tenure with independence and kind of finding his footing. 2021 and 2025 was ramping up and establishing yourself in the Big 12. Now the challenge for Kalani and the program is, as he puts it, to build a juggernaut. And that is not easy. And, it's manageable at BYU. It's just an 8-win team. They've done that. I mean, that's been their history over 50 years. But can you become an elite program year after year where no matter who the players are, who the coaches are, you kind of get that benefit of the doubt where, like, they're always going to be in the mix. And that's the challenge in front of them this year and for the years ahead, with Kalani being pretty much kind of cemented as the guy going forward. That's the challenge. And it feels like it's kind of the first year of this new kind of era for Kalani Sitake as he's got his long-term deal.
The thing listening to you, Mitch, that's really encouraging, I think, is it seems to me that BYU is building depth, which is something they haven't been able to do in the past, particularly when they're independent. So I think that's really encouraging as you're talking about all the various players on the offensive line and whatnot. So here is the million-dollar question, or let's just say multi-million-dollar question. What's it going to take to overtake – and obviously Utah's going to be a factor. We're not going to discard them at all. But what's it going to take to overtake the NFL salaried roster of Texas Tech?
BYU has to, they have to, I think, have a higher-powered offense that has more explosive plays. I think, BYU is very methodical last year. They were a team that could put together a 10, 11, 12-play drive. They got to have more explosive playmakers on the edges at wide receiver. They got to have more depth at running back, and you're going to have to roll with what you got right now. And those are areas of concern. Outside of LJ Martin at running back, that is a big question to me in spring ball. And because, that's going to be something I'm really curious to see who emerges as some viable options that could be RB2, RB3 behind LJ Martin this season. They feel like they've got some guys, but BYU's just got to be a little bit more of an explosive offense, big plays, get things a little bit easier, because against, even Texas Tech, that one touchdown drive they had in the Big 12 championship, it was a great drive, that opening series, but it took, 11, 12 plays, whatever it ended up being back in December. That can't be the model every single drive. They got to have some, big play ability. And I think LJ Martin's that, and I think Bear Bachmeier can do that. They got to identify those big playmakers too. And Texas Tech is going to be big time again this year. BYU doesn't face them in the regular season, but I would expect that Texas Tech's going to be back in Arlington. And, they lose David Bailey, but they got a guy from like Allen University who looks like a carbon copy of him, watching his D3 film. And you're saying, where do they find these guys? So they've done an excellent job of really identifying hidden gems too, along with the big dollar guys that Texas Tech has found with their player personnel. I think BYU feels pretty good about their player personnel department as well, with how they're building out their rosters. There's still some areas where, like I laid out with wide receiver and running back, where there's some questions. But I think what BYU's done a good job too with building out their depth. They haven't just been signing recruiting classes that all go immediately on missions. Like, you'll look at this today with practice. A big bulk of their 2026 recruiting class, outside of 8 guys, is going to be on campus going through practice today, which is kind of unheard of when you think of BYU recruiting classes of the past. Usually it was always, well, see you in 2 years and we'll get back to you when maybe it's a redshirt year, and then suddenly 3 years have gone by and they haven't played a down still. And now you're getting more balance to where, at least 50, 60% of your signing class is going to be there from year one, and they're immediately stepping in and trying to contribute and, create more depth. And I think BYU's taking a more strategic approach to that, where it can't just solely be sign and send guys. Like, yes, that is part of the DNA of BYU football. At the same time, you also have to have some immediate contributors as well, because if you try to always just sign and send and then red shirt and then maybe gray shirt, that's 3 or 4 years, and you're behind the 8 ball where these other teams are just stacking up depth year after year. You got to be able to keep contend with them. And BYU's got more financial resources where they're investing at a higher level. And I think the player development, the talent, and they really believe in their strength and conditioning staff. They've had a lot of success there with that change a couple of years ago. So things are good right now for BYU. They got to just take it to a higher level, and that's easier said than done.
Mitch, appreciate your time. Thanks again for helping us out with that re-rank show last week. That was awesome stuff, and I'm sure you got some nothing but positive feedback from that as well from Utah and BYU fans. But can't thank you enough, man. You're the best.
You bet, guys. Take care.
There he is, Mitch Harper, KSLSports.com, BYU insider.